All right, we're going to do a quick run through World War One over the next few videos. If you want a little bit more detail, there's a playlist on my channel that's got a little beefier run through World War One, but we're going a little quicker this year. So, a World War One in brief, starting with the origins of the war. Now, I want all of my students to know this map of Europe in 1914, and I want you to be able to recognize the changes that Europe is going to go through from 1914 to the end of the war, and the treaties that follow in 1919, and also be able to distinguish that map from what's going to come after in 1945. So know this map, know where Germany, Austria-Hungary, Russia, France, Britain, Italy all are. We're going to run through what were known as the Big Five nations of the world in 1914, and going to lay out for each of them their standing in relation to each other. So we've got Britain, Germany, France, Russia, and then Austria-Hungary. Now, starting with Britain, they're the richest country in the world at this time. They're the most liberal, which means they're very democratic. They're an industrial powerhouse. They've got the biggest empire in the world. Remember, the sun never set on the British Empire. To support that empire and really what allowed that empire to exist, the British have the largest navy in the world. And they've got a really small volunteer army because it's an island nation. They don't need to defend themselves very much. Germany on the continent is a newer nation. They just unified in 1871 as a bunch of German principalities, and the Empire of Prussia merged into a new country. They've got a big population. They're industrially modern. They've got a massive army and a growing navy that's competing with the British and others. They defeated France in the Franco-Prussian War, which just continues a long line of animosities between those two states. They've got an alliance called the Dual Alliance with Austria-Hungary to their south. And they're a little late to the imperial game because they were late to the nation state game, but they are growing in Africa and in East Asia. France, it's an industrialized state. They've got the second largest empire in the world behind Britain, with many holdings in Africa and in Southeast Asia. Again, they were defeated by this new German state, or Prussia, in 1870 and 71. Their population's a little smaller than their German counterparts, and they're growing more slowly. They create an alliance with Russia. Now, Russia is the largest nation in the world at this time by land and population. They are industrially underdeveloped compared to their Western European neighbors. They have an autocratic government that is being challenged by liberal movements. Revolution is on the doorstep in Russia. They're also very ethnically diverse. And then finally, Austria-Hungary, the weakest of these five great powers. They're ethnically diverse with challenges from nationalist movements, especially Serbian people in Bosnia and Herzegovina. Now, some other players you want to be familiar with as we move into World War I, the Ottoman Empire, a long-lasting empire. It's been around since the 14th century, now known by some as the sick man of Europe. European nations have been expanding and kind of chipping away territory from the Ottomans. Nationalist movements have grown that have broken away pieces of the Ottoman Empire. And the Ottoman Empire itself saw this, and they issued some reform movements in the 19th century to try to liberalize and nationalize their empire, but much ethnic strife remained. Serbia is a newer country, broken away from the Ottoman Empire in the 19th century, and they're becoming a regional power in the Balkan Peninsula. Many ethnic Serbs, though, live in neighboring Bosnia, and there's a desire to unify all of the Serbian people. You should be familiar with the small nation of Belgium in Northern Europe. They got independence in the 1830s, and they were promised to be protected in that independence by other nations like Britain and France and Prussia at the time. And Italy, they're a relatively new country as well, just a little bit older than Germany. But they've got some territorial disputes with their neighbors like France and Austria-Hungary, though they will join into an alliance with Austria-Hungary and Germany that becomes known as the Triple Alliance. Now, we're going to talk really quickly about some long-term causes of this First World War, and many history classes land on this acronym MAIN: militarism, alliances, imperialism, nationalism. We're going to run through these really quickly. Militarism is viewing a nation's strength through the strength of their military. And with this idea, nations like Germany and France and Britain are going to be growing ever larger militaries as time goes on. They're also benefiting from the products of the Industrial Revolution. They can literally build bigger armies than could ever exist before. Because these armies are growing so massive and threatening, nations will form alliances with each other. When countries with mutual interests or maybe common enemies will pledge to defend each other. Note the Triple Alliance, Germany, Austria-Hungary, and then Italy, and then the Triple Entente, which actually started as the Dual Entente between France and Russia, and later Britain will join in on that. Imperialism, the I. The drive to expand a nation's boundaries. Now, this is being seen in the 19th and early 20th century in Africa and Asia as European countries are looking for territory to expand their capacity for industrial production. And this drive for territory is going to lead to a lot of rivalries between these European nations. And then finally, nationalism. And I think this one really drives the others. Loyalty and devotion to one's nation, but that your nation supersedes the needs of all other nations. Like basically your nation has a right to do what it wants at the expense of others. We also see the idea of nationalism in a desire to have independence for maybe an ethnic nation or an ethnic national group that don't have their own country yet. Think of big empires like the Ottoman Empire with a number of ethnic minorities within that would want to have their own country. Same with Austria-Hungary. So that's where we come to the start of the war and the short-term causes. It's the assassination of Archduke Franz Ferdinand, the heir of the Austro-Hungarian throne. Ethnic diversity in Austria-Hungary and a nationalistic drive amongst ethnic Serbs will lead to an organization called the Black Hand, a nationalist group of Serbs that is willing to use violence to try to meet their political goals. This is the definition of terrorism, violence for a political end. And their desire is to create what they would call a greater Serbia, where all the Serbian people would live in one united nation. On June 28th, 1914, one assassin within that Black Hand group shot and killed the Archduke Franz Ferdinand and his pregnant wife while they were on tour in Sarajevo, in a region of Austria-Hungary called Bosnia. Austria-Hungary was furious at Serbia for the killing of the heir to their throne of Franz Joseph, their emperor. And this leads to what becomes known as the July Crisis of 1914. Austria demanded that Serbia allow an investigation into this assassination. Those demands go unmet. Serbia is not willing to give up its national sovereignty or its national rights and independence. Austria then consults with Germany, their ally in the dual alliance, and Germany offers what becomes known as the blank check. Basically, hey, Austria, you do what you need to do. We will stand behind our alliance with you. This gives Austria the ability to issue an ultimatum. Essentially, you let us in to investigate this crime, or it is war. And Serbia does not relent. And so now military mobilizations will begin. Mobilizations just mean getting your armies ready to actually fight. It doesn't mean war. It's not a declaration of war. It's just getting guys ready. But these mobilizations will lead to the enacting of war plans, which will require declarations of war. Russia will mobilize their army in defense of Austria, who is now attacking Serbia, on July 31st, 1914. Germany will then declare war on Russia and France, and they will mobilize on the 1st of August, 1914. Germany will begin its Schlieffen Plan, its war plan to attack France and defeat them before having to deal with the Russians on their east. And this begins with an invasion of Belgium on their way to France on the 3rd of August, 1914. And then on the next day, Britain will stand by that old treaty back from 1839 to defend neutral Belgium by declaring war on Germany. Now we've got a World War I. See you next time.